How are you feeling today? Right now, as you are listening to these words, there are millions of men living in a kind of hell they have no language to describe. They are not beaten, not shouted at, and not openly betrayed. They are just slowly disappearing. Day after day, they live beside a woman who once made them believe she is the destiny of my life. And then, no one knows from when, they began to fear their own home, fear the sound of footsteps in the kitchen, fear the icy silence of the evening, fear the question, "What's wrong with you?" A question that sounds caring but is actually searching for a weakness. From the outside, people see a good husband, a stable family, and a gentle woman. No one knows. Inside that very house, a soul is quietly withering. The most terrifying thing about psychological abuse is not that it hurts, but that it makes you believe you are the cause of that pain. He begins apologizing for things he never did. He tries to fix faults that never existed. He believes that if he becomes kinder, softer, and sacrifices more, she will smile again like she used to. But no, the more he tries, the colder her eyes become. The more he yields, the more he is erased from his own life. The world teaches men to be strong, to be patient, and to endure. But no one teaches them how to recognize when that endurance is killing their soul. They think, I'm just being a good man. I'm protecting my family. Not knowing that they're becoming victims of a form of invisible violence disguised under the name love. People often think violence is yelling, breaking things, or hitting. But no, sometimes it begins with a smile. A smile that makes you believe she's different, she understands me. Relationships like that never begin with control. They begin with a feeling of being deeply understood. She listens to you talk for hours, remembers every little detail, and makes you believe you've just found your other half. That is not love. That is a perfect psychological assessment. Because to control someone, you must first know how to make them believe you are the safest place they have. I once met a man, 60 years old, owner of a big company, who had everything: reputation, money, children, and a family everyone thought was ideal. But in the mansion he paid for, he lived like a shadow. For 3 years, his wife hadn't spoken a single word to him. They ate in the same kitchen, slept on the same bed, but lived as two parallel worlds. One silent, one gradually fading away. He ate alone, went out alone, and lived alone. His house, but the property title had her name. The mortgage loan, his name. Love, he paid with his freedom. It all started very small. She said, "Your friends aren't good for you. They influence you badly." He cut them off. Then his hobbies. "You're too old to go fishing now?" He gave that up too. Next came his family. "I don't get along with your mother. I don't want to see her anymore." And gradually, every connection disappeared, leaving only her. When she was certain he had no one left but her, all the tenderness vanished. That is how a person gets reprogrammed. Not through threats, but through reasons like, because I love you and because I want what's best for you. Bit by bit, love becomes a series of commands wrapped in fake compassion. He once told me, "I don't understand anymore. I did everything right. I never cheated, never yelled, but somehow I'm still being punished." I looked at him and understood. He wasn't being punished for doing wrong. He was being punished for believing that real love never hurts. That is the greatest trick of manipulators. They make you believe that every wound you receive is to teach you how to love correctly. And by the time you realize it, the person destroying you is the very one you once thought you couldn't live without. People think violence is when blood is shed, when someone screams in pain. But real violence sometimes happens in silence. No sound, no marks. Just one person slowly wearing away, bit by bit, without anyone noticing. Men use fists, women sometimes use words. One leaves bruises on the skin. The other leaves cracks in the soul, and ironically, only one of those is illegal. A woman can make a man doubt his own memory, emotions, and worth for years, but no one will believe him. Not the police, not his friends, not even the people who once saw him collapse, because society only believes what can be seen, and emotional wounds are invisible. And because they are invisible, they are dismissed, denied, and forgotten. I once heard a man say, choking on his words, "I don't know why, but every time she says, 'I just want what's best for you,' my chest tightens like someone is squeezing my heart." That is the most frightening thing about any toxic relationship, when words of love are no longer connected, but it becomes a subtle form of hypnosis that makes you forget you're being hurt. She doesn't need to hit him. She only needs to make him believe everything is his fault. Believe that. If I'm sad, it must be because of you. If I'm cold, you must have done something wrong. And he begins to live in the state of a chronic apologizer, apologizing to keep the peace, apologizing to avoid conflict, apologizing to avoid abandonment. That is a form of psychological imprisonment. No bars, no locked doors, but the person inside no longer dares to step out, because every time he tries to resist, she cries or goes silent or turns away. And that coldness is more terrifying than any insult. Psychological violence does not kill instantly. It kills by making you slowly kill yourself. In silence, in reasoning, in endless self-blame. On the outside, he still works, still smiles, and still looks fine. But every night in the familiar room, he feels like a stranger in his own life. A figure that breathes but no longer lives. That is the cruelty of invisible violence. It not only destroys you, it makes you thank the person who destroyed you. No one enters a relationship intending to be controlled. Everything begins with love. The hugs, the caring words, the warm evenings that seem harmless. But sometimes, from that very place, something else begins to form. Power. A kind of power that needs no yelling, no threats, yet still makes you obedient, compliant, and believing that you are in love. She doesn't need to use violence. She only needs to make you believe everything is your fault. If she's sad, it must be because you're not attentive enough. If she's angry, you must have done something wrong. If she's cold, you must have been careless. And you, afraid of losing her love, begin apologizing for things you never did. You live in constant guilt, as if every storm was started by you. I once met a man who said his wife forced him into therapy for sex addiction. I asked, "Do you actually have a problem?" He gave a sad smile. "I just want to be close to her more than once a month." And he believed her. He truly believed something was wrong with him, simply because she said so, and said it in a voice as soft as a passing breeze. Then came another phase. She didn't need to forbid him from seeing his friends. She only needed to create conflict right when he was about to leave the house. A small comment, a look, a deliberate silence, and he stayed. After a few times, his friends faded away. No one called him anymore. He thought, they must be busy, but in reality, she had made him isolate himself. Without ever giving an order, she knew that to control someone, you only need to make them believe they're choosing their own freedom. When you begin to withdraw, she enters another phase, subtler, more cruel, turning humiliation into a joke. In front of others, she laughs brightly. "My husband is adorable, just a bit weak when it comes to making money. He's trying to lose weight, but it'll probably take forever. He said he'd be more romantic, maybe next year." Everyone laughs, you laugh too, but inside that laughter, something in you dies. And when you say you're hurt, she replies, "Oh my God, I was just joking. Why are you so sensitive?" No one notices that she's gradually erasing your image in the eyes of the world, and each time you resist, you end up looking like the one with the problem. And then, when nothing else works, she uses the quietest yet strongest weapon: sex. No longer connected, no longer sharing. Now it becomes a reward and punishment system. When you please her, you are loved. When you do wrong, you are punished with silence. A silence long, cold, and calculated. A man once told me he hadn't been intimate with his wife in 3 years. Not because he didn't want to, but because every time he tried, she added a new condition. He had to lose weight, had to earn more money, had to be more attentive, and had to prove he was worthy. And he waited, he always waited, because deep down, he believed that if he became just a bit better, she would love him again like before. But no, that was not love. It was strategy. A psychological game built to make him feel he was never enough. Every word, every look, every small gesture was designed to make him shrink, to make himself small, to turn love into a form of emotional servitude. And when he realized it, he no longer knew where he ended and where the shadow she created to make him easier to control began. There is something strange about manipulated relationships. You never know you're being imprisoned until you have no one left to call, nowhere left to go, and no memory of who you once were. She doesn't need to say, "You belong to me." She only needs to make you afraid of losing her, afraid of her anger, afraid of the silence that stretches long and cold enough to squeeze the life out of someone's heart. And so slowly you build a cage for yourself, then lock it with your own hands. I once met a man who said his wife never forbade him, never yelled, she only liked to compare a little. She often said, "My sister's husband just bought her a diamond ring. My friend got to spend a whole month in Europe. Her husband is so thoughtful." You're exactly the type of man who talks big but never does anything. These sentences sound harmless at first, but they are like drops of water falling on the same spot in his heart until they bore a hole through it. He began working like a madman, buying gifts, spoiling her just to be acknowledged, just to make her stop comparing. But enough was a destination she would never allow him to reach. Then, when she had children, everything shifted to another level. The children, the ones he loved more than himself, became the ultimate weapon. She knew he would never leave his kids, so she could do anything she wanted. Just one sentence: "If you walk out, don't expect to see the kids again." Or, "I'll tell them what kind of man their father really is." So he stayed. Not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of losing the only thing that still made him feel like a father, like a human being. Another man told me his wife once looked him straight in the eyes and said, "You can leave me, but you'll lose the house, the kids, and half your life paying for me, so you'd better behave." And he behaved. Not because he was weak, but because he knew the system is not on his side. The police would believe her, society would tell him to man up, and his friends, if he told them, would laugh. "Bro, your wife is bullying you?" She could use tears like knives, and the world outside would hand her more knives. She could say, "You scare me," and people would look at him like an abuser. No one sees how many times he was stabbed first, with words, with coldness, with silence, before he ever raised his voice. But the most frightening thing isn't her anger, it's her ability to make him doubt his own memory. "I never said that. You imagined it. You're being sensitive again." Day by day, week by week, month by month, he begins to believe he truly is crazy, that his memory cannot be trusted. She slowly rewrites the history between them, and all he can do is bow his head and apologize for things that never happened. In relationships like these, you don't need handcuffs or chains, because the strongest chain is the fear of being abandoned. She knows that, and she uses it like an art form. One time she cries, and he softens. One time she collapses, and he misses an important meeting. every time he tries to break free, a crisis appears right on cue. A headache, a panic attack, a sudden breakdown. He stays, partly out of love, partly out of fear. But that is exactly what she wants. She has turned his kindness into his shackles. Love, which is supposed to make people free, now becomes a form of psychological captivity, where people still smile, still look happy, but only in the photos they post online. There is a kind of prison with no walls, no guards, just one person constantly saying they love you, and you believe them. Believe them so completely that you don't see it, that love isn't saving you, but slowly consuming your soul day by day. What hurts these men the most is not the control from the woman they love, but the silence of the entire world. When a woman is hurt, society rises to defend her. But when a man collapses, people laugh and say, "You're too weak." He tries to tell his friends and they say, "Come on, man, you're a guy. What's the big deal?" He goes to therapy and they ask, "Do you ever get angry?" If the police are called, they look at him and shrug, "You want us to arrest your wife?" An entire system, law, society, therapy, media, is built on the assumption that men are the perpetrators and women are the victims. The law protects women from physical violence, but not a single clause mentions psychological abuse against men. I once heard the story of a man. His wife threw things at him, insulted him, tore documents, and destroyed property. When he called the police, they arrived, looked around for a few seconds, and laughed. "Don't you think you're overreacting? She's just a woman." A week later, when she smashed things again, he tried to hold her hands, and this time, she called the police. She cried. And he was handcuffed, even though he was the one with injuries, even though she didn't have a single scratch. That night, he slept in a jail cell. And for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be an invisible man. The system was not designed for them. Support centers are for women. Hotlines, organizations, campaigns all point to the other side. As for them, they're not allowed to cry, not allowed to say they're hurt, because that is not masculine. Society has created the perfect trap. Men are taught to protect, not to complain. So when they are the ones being hurt, no one believes them. No one protects them. No one knows that behind that restrained smile is someone breaking a little more each day. And the cruel irony is that very silence empowers the manipulator. She knows that if he reacts, he will be seen as the abuser. If he gets angry, she'll have evidence. If he speaks up, she'll cry. And so every time he tries to rise up, the world only sees an angry man and a fragile woman, and the truth. No one wants to hear it. That is the fatal blow, not from the woman he loves, but from an unintentional society, a society that sides with fears, not truth. And gradually, this man learns to stay silent, not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows no one will believe him. He continues to live, to smile, to play the role of husband and father, but inside he has withdrawn his soul from his own life. Psychological abuse does not need physical violence. All it needs is a society blind to the pain of men, and that blindness is the most dangerous weapon of all. Then one day, in the familiar house, in the repetition of daily routines, he suddenly feels empty. No more anger, no more fear, no more belief that everything will be okay. Only one thing remains: exhaustion that has reached its absolute end. At that point, he no longer wants to argue, no longer wants to prove he's right, no longer wants to save what has already died long ago. He wants only one thing: to breathe. And at that very moment, though painful enough to feel suffocating, is the first second of awakening. He begins to realize something about this relationship is not normal. He is no longer himself. He no longer has his own voice, his own hobbies, or his own friends. All that remains is a more acceptable version of himself, the version she created so she could control him more easily. At first, he doubts himself. He thinks, maybe I'm just too sensitive. But then, pieces of memory begin to return. The times she twisted the truth, the times she made him doubt his own memory, the times she burst into tears right after he said something honest. Everything pieces together into a complete picture, and he realizes this is not love. This is an emotional control system built with precision. When someone stays in psychological abuse long enough, they no longer recognize they're being hurt because the manipulator is too clever. They don't hurt him immediately. They make him accustomed to the hurt. A bit of guilt today, a bit of silence tomorrow, a bit of distance, a bit of coldness, then a sudden burst of affection to make him believe things are getting better. That is how a victim's psychology is programmed, and only when he begins to face the truth does the fog finally start to lift. Waking up from this trance is not easy because every new realization comes with pain. Pain from seeing he was deceived. Pain from admitting that the person he once loved may never have loved him the way he believed. But understand this: every healing journey begins with truth. Without truth, there is no freedom. Without freedom, every piece is just a velvet-lined prison. So when he starts asking questions, when he pauses and looks deeply at everything around him, that is not weakness. It is the sign of a soul trying to come home. And then he will realize, sometimes it wasn't she who destroyed him, but himself. When he was too afraid to look back, the moment he dares to face the truth is the very moment he begins to reclaim the power he once lost. Not the power to control someone else, but the power to exist as himself. There is a moment in the awakening journey, so painful that no one can prepare for it. It is a moment he realizes the woman he once loved, once protected, once sacrificed for, never truly existed. No, she hasn't disappeared. She's still there, still cooking, still smiling, still saying sweet things when she wants to. But now he sees clearly. None of it is love anymore, but a performance crafted too skillfully. She didn't love him for who he was, but because he believed she loved him. She didn't need chains to control him. Because the illusion of love was already the strongest rope. Once he thought she was gentle. Now he understands. It was a strategy to gain trust. Once he thought she needed him. Now he knows she only needed the feeling of power. Once he thought she was fragile, but in truth, he was the one being made fragile. Truth is never easy to swallow, especially when it strips away an illusion he lived in for so long. Realizing that he had loved someone who wasn't real is like waking from a sweet dream only to find himself in a cold, empty room with the slow thudding of his own heartbeat. He begins to remember moments he once thought were romantic. The sudden hugs, the compliments, the tender looks, the affectionate messages. But now, under the light of truth, they look like strategies. Bait dropped at the perfect moment just to make him addicted to the feeling of being loved and willing to endure everything just to taste it again. That is the horrifying cycle of toxic relationships. Pain, then sweetness, then pain, then sweetness. Every time he thinks of leaving, she pulls him back with gentleness, with apologies, with tears. He thinks she has changed, but no, she only changed tactics. He stays, not because of love, but because of addiction. Addicted to the moment she comes back to hug him. Addicted to the thought that maybe this time will be different. But every time is the same. The only difference is that he loses another piece of himself. Awakening is not about leaving her, but leaving the illusion of the person he thought she was. Because real love never makes a person shrink, But the kind of love he's holding on to makes him small, quiet, afraid, and constantly censoring his own emotions just to keep her calm. At this point, he understands. She is not the enemy. She is simply the final lesson of a soul that loved too much and forgot itself. A mirror reflecting the things he once refused to face. The fear of abandonment, the craving for validation, and the compulsive longing to save someone just to feel worthy. And then he sees none of this started with her. It started within him, from the child inside him, the one who once believed he had to do everything right to be loved. The truth is, she is not the woman he loved. She is only the reflection of the wounds he never healed. And when he sees that, truly sees it, the pain softens. Not because he forgives her, but because he begins to return to himself. What keeps a man in a toxic relationship? Sometimes it is not love. It is pride, a quiet kind of pride, taught to him since he was a child. Men must be strong. Men don't complain. Men must endure. And so even when he is hurting, he still smiles. Even when he's collapsing, he still says, "I'm fine." He tells no one because he fears they won't believe him. He doesn't leave because he fears being seen as a failure. He doesn't cry because he fears losing the image of a steady man. But those very things are what kill him slowly. Because every time he stays silent to prove he is strong, he closes the door of his heart a little more. Every time he pretends to be okay, he teaches others that he can handle more. And every time he swallows his tears, he denies himself the right to be human. Society glorifies resilience, but forgets that resilience does not mean silencing emotions. Sometimes, daring to say, "I'm hurting," is the bravest act a man can perform. Do you know what the cruelest irony is? That the very pride he thinks is protecting him is actually keeping him locked in a cage. He does not want pity, so he stays silent. He does not want people to think she's a bad person, so he covers for her. He does not want to be seen as weak, so he endures more, and layer by layer, he disappears. It is not she who binds him. It is his own need to be strong that binds him. She only needs to sit still and say, "I'm tired of you whining." What kind of man is so weak? And instantly he withdraws again, trying to prove he is man enough, trying to stay quiet a bit longer, trying to endure one more round. At some point, he no longer knows what is real strength and what is fake strength, because strength without freedom is just a form of slavery decorated with honor. He once thought leaving was cowardice, but sometimes leaving is courage, because it requires him to face the fear of judgment, the guilt, the eyes of others, to accept, "I have been hurt, and I no longer want to live inside that hurt." That is not failure. It is the maturation of the soul. A truly strong man is not someone who never falls, but someone who dares to rise after falling and dares to say, "I was hurt, but I will not let that define me." When he dares to face his pain, it loses its power over him. When he dares to speak of what he endured, silence stops being a prison. And when he dares to choose himself, toxic love loses its grip. No one laughs at a man who speaks honestly about his pain, and if someone does, they're only hiding from their own fears. So if today you're hearing these words and your heart aches a little, that is not weakness. That is the first signal of returning home, returning to truth, to dignity, to the person you once were before love became chains. At some point, every victim stands before the same crossroads. One side is the familiar hell, where he knows every breath, every sigh, every emotional loop. The other side is the unfamiliar land of freedom, where he doesn't know what awaits, only that at least there he will get to be himself. And the only question left is, does he dare to walk away? Freedom, at first glance, is a beautiful word, but to truly be free, he must trade for it with loss, with loneliness, with watching everything collapse just so he can start again. He may lose his home, lose his children, lose his reputation, lose the image of the perfect man he has tried to maintain for years. But among all those things, there is one thing he must never lose: himself. If he stays, he may keep everything: the house, the dinners, the outer shell of a stable marriage. But inside, he will continue to shrink, continue walking on the glass shards of silence and self-blame, continue living in a home without laughter, where the eyes of the one he loves look at him like an old, worn-out object. And one day, he will realize he's no longer afraid of losing her, because what is more terrifying is losing himself and still having to stay. Leaving is not revenge. Leaving is a declaration that he deserves peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from a day without arguments, but the peace of a soul that no longer has to be on guard, no longer has to apologize in order to be loved. He may sit there and ask himself, what about the children? What about the family? What about everything I've built? The answer is painful, but true. None of those things can truly exist if the person living inside them is no longer himself. An unhappy father cannot teach his children what happiness is. A man erased of his identity cannot teach anyone about love. The world out there may judge him. They will say, "You're weak. You should have tried harder. You gave up." But they don't know that sometimes leaving is not giving up. It is surviving. That the moment he dares to say enough is the bravest act of his entire life. When he walks away, there will be no fireworks, no applause, only silence. But within that silence, there will be something very small he will feel, the sound of his heart beating again in its own rhythm. And that is the sign that he has returned. Remember, every day he stays is a day he can never get back. Every time he stays silent, he gives someone else the right to define his worth. At some point, he must ask himself, am I living or am I just existing? He has only one life, one chance to live in alignment with his soul, one moment to be free. And if today he is hearing these words, then perhaps this is the final invitation. Do not wait for a miracle. Do not wait for someone to save you, because no one can save a person who still chooses to stay inside his own prison. Take the step, even if your legs tremble, because in the end, freedom is not being unafraid, but daring to keep walking, even while still afraid. He does not owe her loyalty and suffering. He only owes himself a chance at peace. And when he truly stands up, that door will no longer be a dead end. It will open, and on the other side, not immediate happiness, but light. The light of someone who finally remembers who he used to be. If he is standing there now, between fear and awakening, let him take a deep breath and walk, because freedom is waiting for him on the other side of that door. And that's the content of this episode. If you feel a sense of resonance with these reflections, don't forget to follow the channel and stay tuned for the upcoming episodes. See you soon. Bye.